Okay, so let's get started. So I'm Emily Bennett. I work in Pitt's Career Center as a STEM career consultant. And this workshop is designed for students who are still looking for opportunities. And I kind of just want to get a gauge here on, oops, hold on one second here, on how many are still like, where are you at in terms of like, have you started yet or not? So if you guys could just do this poll, basically, if you've already started, if, somewhat maybe here and there. I know a lot of you might be waiting until your classes or your finals are starting to wrap up here. Okay. All right, so it looks like, yeah, okay. So it looks like the majority of you have started, at least, partially, and totally don't feel like, you didn't have to, or you had to before this, but hopefully the tips that are going to be provided here will help either help you analyze like what's working or what's not working, or provide you with some info that will be helpful. So in terms of what we're going to go over, resources, the job search strategy itself, how to do industry and company research, make connections. And then I have resume tips and interview tips at the end, because I think a lot of times students think it's their resume is why they're not getting a job, but most likely it's their strategy around trying to get a job that could use a little bit of extra way of looking at things. So we'll talk about that. But I definitely don't want to discount the fact that we want to make sure, our resumes look great and that we're prepared for interviews. And so I mentioned resource availability. So I'm going to be going over a lot of information in a half hour. And so if you need any follow-up at all in terms of like what you're personally experiencing, or you just want to touch base about your resume or cover letter, anything like that, know that you have a career consultant. Most likely as an undergrad, and then the graduate schools might have their own. So we can help you navigate this if you're unsure of who that person might be. If you go to careers.pitt.edu, there is a link there to figure out like who your career consultant is. We're available for 30-minute appointments, as well as office hours, Monday through Friday. And those are more first come, first serve. So you can pop in, especially if you have like a time sensitive sort of question or something that could be responded to in 20 minutes. But speaking of time sensitive things, you can also just email your career consultant, especially if it has to do with offers and salary. You might want to email your resume if you want to do that, like if you don't feel like you need to schedule something. So just a heads up. And then I'm not going to like dwell on this slide much, but I just want you to know that there are tons of career consultants that there might be some overlap here. So for instance, you might be a student athlete and also, in an engineering program or something like that. So just know that, actually, I think there's like, 9 of us. So you can go in and go off of your major, or if there's a certain identifier like a student athlete, and then you'll have more information on the website. The other resource that, I'm hoping you're aware of because you probably signed up for the event through Handshake, but I just want to let you know as students who are going to be leaving the university soon that Handshake is still active for you. Like you still have this as an option to look for opportunities. There's still events that are open to alums. So that doesn't really change. However, what does change is if you tried to make an appointment with one of us when you officially become an alum, it's not going to let you. So you'll either have to email your career consultant or call our front desk to schedule. So that's one thing that's a little bit different. And the other thing that's a little bit different too, it's some of the employers, whenever they put in the job postings, they might say seniors, and they, basically when you become an alum officially, even if it's like 2 weeks after graduation, sometimes, there's like a little thing in Handshake that will say, you don't match the qualifications for your class year because you're technically graduated. Don't worry about that. You should still apply, but I just wanted to let you know so you didn't not apply because of that. Okay. So as I mentioned, a lot of what comes into play here is the actual strategy that you have in terms of looking for opportunities. So there's something called the spray and pray method, which is what like probably 90% of people inherently do because it's most comfortable and it's what people know to do. So you're going to the large job boards like Indeed and LinkedIn and Handshake, and you're applying to what you're seeing on there, and then you're just kind of hoping you get a response. The issue with this is that so is everyone else. There's a lot of people you're automatically competing with because you've all seen the same posting. So if you switch into a mentality of, sure, it's fine, I'm going to apply to things on those job boards, but I'm also going to think about a company first approach, you can be in more control of your situation and your search. And so by that, I mean, you're identifying target industries or target companies, maybe specific geographic locations that you would like to work. Even if you want to work anywhere, you still want to maybe narrow some things down just to make this less overwhelming. And what's going to happen is the more you look into companies and see what's out there, you're going to start applying to jobs on their website. Definitely check in Handshake to see if they have anything posted. In fact, Handshake has got a great employer directory in there under the jobs tab. So you can actually go in and see if there's contact info for an employer in there, and you could follow up on those applications that way. So it's like, even if they don't have anything posted in Handshake, but they have their recruiter contact info, use that, use your PIT benefits in that way. Because now if you followed up on an application, maybe you've reached out about something that you weren't quite sure about the job description, you're no longer just like a nameless sort of faceless person in this applicant pool. So that could be something to help. And then by you identifying companies that you truly are interested in, it's going to help ensure, or at least make it a little bit more possible that you'll enjoy the work that you're doing in the company and you're asking the right types of questions in interviews and things like that. So I'll go into more detail about like how to do this research, but I just wanted to kind of have you shift that focus into there is a way to be targeted and not compete with all these other people. You also have to factor in like what's changed with the pandemic. So remote work has really changed a lot of the work environments and the way that interviews are happening. It obviously changed a lot of the way that you interacted with employers this year. So gone were the fairs where you could just kind of like show up and meet someone that way. And so some of these things aren't going to change right away. There's definitely going to be companies that are going to stick with virtual interviews, some companies who are going to remain working virtually or provide that as an opportunity or an option. And so these are just things to be on the lookout for and to think in terms of like, especially with remote work, whether it is something you want to do and knowing that before you accept the job offer. So these are some things you can think about prior to the search or during. I also want you to keep in mind that obviously the pandemic disrupted a lot of things, but the average person between 25 and 34 was still only holding a position for 2.8 years. So like, even if you do something that is not completely what you thought you were going to be doing, but it's still developing your skill set, it's still building a network, maybe in the industry that you want to be in ideally, but it's just a different role, or maybe it's the role and then you're in a different industry. I know it's easier said than done, but try not to get too hung up on this first job. I know that's like a sometimes crazy thing to say, but it really is you're leveraging things on and on throughout your career. It's not like a one and done sort of thing. So give yourself a little bit of grace here in terms of what your role is. And then in terms of like things happening, pandemic is not the only thing that's going to happen that's going to disrupt hiring or the way that the market performs. So I want to emphasize that waiting and hoping isn't actually a strategy. And for some students, it was temporarily. They're thinking, it's okay to do a summer internship because I still was able to volunteer or work on some projects. And like, I just needed time to relax. That's one thing. But the other thing is applying to places and just, or not applying to places because you're like, well, the industry's not doing so great. I mean, why even try? Like, if I'm not in this particular role, like, I don't even want to work there. I'll just wait until something else opens up. That will not serve you well because, as I mentioned, if you even just get into some facet of what you're into, you're going to meet people who are going to continue to propel you forward in your career. So you don't need to wait, if that makes sense. Okay. So I mentioned creating your own list of companies here. So this begins with really sitting down and thinking about what's important to you. And I know as early career graduates, you're probably more concerned with just getting a job and you think that you shouldn't be too picky. Well, actually, the more targeted you are, the more successful you can be because you're not just having a very overly broad general search. You're actually truly applying to places you want to be at. And so one of the first factors to keep in mind is the location. even with remote work, like, are you trying to build a life in another city? Okay, like, are there certain costs of living prohibiting factors where maybe you have a 5-year goal where you want to move to the West Coast? These are all things to start thinking about now, because whenever you start getting into interviews and you start building these lists, location can be one of like the make or break sort of things for people. There's the whole live to work versus work to live philosophy. And honestly, starting out, like, everyone works pretty hard, but eventually you'll see, do I want to be someone who can leave their work at home? Do I not care? When you're on interviews and you're asking about what the day-to-day looks like, is the team saying, hey, we hang out after work, or, we're working 60 hours a week. Can you keep up? Like, these are things you have to think about, because whenever you get into these situations, you can actively kind of listen and hear, is this someplace, that I want to be? Is this the type of role or the team that's good for me? Money. Okay, so money means different things to different people, but at the very heart of this, you should be getting paid what your experience and your skills are providing you. So salary.com is a fantastic resource in order to plug in a job description and a location and just get your basic range that you might need for a job. But obviously certain industries pay more than others. So if money is a big factor in your life, then you should look into places and industries that pay more, if that makes sense. Like, you can weed out a lot of things that way. Manage or be managed. So just starting out, you might not be comfortable being managed, but over time, maybe you want to develop leadership roles. So that's something to keep in mind. This, like I said, this might be more so like when you're on interviews that you get to the heart of what this company is about. And then making a difference or making an impact, is very important for a lot of people. So understanding like what a company stands for and what they do, if it resonates with you, you're going to feel a better sense of purpose. So just if that's important to you, something to keep in mind. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has a ton of reports on industry trends, especially with COVID. They've got a ton of things that they're working on. So if you would like to look into high growth industries or see how a particular industry has been impacted, definitely check out that site. You can also look into vault.com. And there is a ton of consulting firms that publish reports as well, like McKinsey and Deloitte. So you can do a search on it and just, give yourself a little bit more info. And then even though I don't necessarily like to tell students that, your major equals your profession, if you are really struggling in terms of like, I have no idea where I want to work, BuzzFile is a really good tool for you because it breaks up companies by major, and then you refine your results by location. So it could be a good starting off point, but I don't want you to get too distracted by that. It's more of a starting off point so that you can start to look into things. And the really nice thing about it too is that when you pull up a company of interest, it will tell you similar companies nearby. So really beneficial if you're moving and you want to know like what's within driving or, certain amount of distance. So definitely check that out. And then LinkedIn is a great resource for company research. These companies, this is free advertising for them. They will tell you what you need to know about them. They'll have press releases and videos, and you can check out jobs that are posted. So great way to do some research on companies there. Okay, and then, that it's one thing to build a list and apply it to relevant places, but take it a step further and see if there isn't a way to gain a little bit more information from the people who actually are working there or in an industry of interest. Sorry. Let me go back to this one here. So one of the ways that you can identify people that are working in certain places is the LinkedIn campus page here. In terms of where you find this, you just search in the search box, University of Pittsburgh. There'll be an alumni tab that you can click on, and you can look up pretty much anything, like companies that you're interested in, people who are living in certain areas. There's so many different things that you could use in here, but it's one of the strategies that I list for students because you can conduct these informational interviews with them. And then in terms of having, hold on one second here. Oh, yes. And then in terms of taking it a step further, so informational interviews are more considered like can you tell me about the work that you're doing? Or can you tell me about how it is the work for this company? Like, you're not actually asking for a job, but you're gaining valuable information. Now, Pitt Commons is a platform that you all have access to as Pitt students through the Pitt portal. And this is taking it potentially a step further if you like. You can interact with employers who are on there. Or not employers, alums that are on there. And it could be in relation to your resume, interview prep. It could just be an informational interview. It will provide you a great list of resources that you can use. Okay. And I totally realized I pulled up the wrong slides as I'm like looking at the next one here. So I'm going to skip over some of these real fast here. So I do apologize. I had many different documents that were open here. So this is something that I did want to mention that came from the workforce trends that I did yesterday. So I do want you to think in terms of, as you're building these lists, the whole remote work aspect, because you're early on in your career. And this is something when you're doing informational interviews that you're going to be able to gain some insight before you accept any sort of offers. So some teams were already working remotely. Some were doing a hybrid model where it was an option. Other teams might not have been open to it, but are now. And so this is a really good reason to do informational interviewing, so that you kind of know, what you're getting yourself into. And to be honest, a lot of these companies might not know. They're dealing with the uncertainty of it as well. And so just to keep that in mind, that things might change as the world is changing. So I did want to bring that up. Okay. Now, a thing that I wanted to also show you here. So like, let's say an employer is looking at equally qualified candidates. Okay. So all they've seen about you is your resume. What ends up happening is like, they kind of got to think in terms of like, what's the most important? Like, are there any factors that are in play that might make you I guess more, not a better fit, but more prepared, to work in the role that they're offering. So NACE, which is the National Association of Colleges and Employers, did an Outlook report. They also did some surveys that they did with employers just to see what they were thinking here. So let's say that you didn't do any informational interviewing. You're just a candidate that's kind of like in this big sort of poll. You should know that there are certain things that they take a look at. So like just reading down through, obviously not everyone has had a chance to have an internship with their organization, but if you do, sometimes that's weighted higher because there's familiarity. Internship experience in that particular industry, they assume that because you did an internship with maybe one of their competitors, that you would make a good candidate because you kind of know what the background of the industry is, or like certain challenges that they might face. Now, the major is on here as third, but I have a feeling that is largely due to like the type of work. So if it's something that's major specific, but I do want you to know, like, especially with tech and things, that major is not necessarily like as big of a thing as in terms of what the degree is, but it's more so the skills, like how are you demonstrating that subject matter that's relevant. So when we talk about resumes, that's something that you would want to showcase. Now, where I'm going with this is that not everyone has had the opportunity to do these things. So I don't want you to get discouraged and say, oh no, like I'm not going to look so great next to someone who has already interned with this company. This is why you reach out to people. This is why you get to know people that are working, because if they are willing to provide a referral for you, the resume might just be a bonus. It's more so like, oh, I had this great conversation with a student. Like they're very eager to get started, and they have an interest in what we're doing. And I really feel like we're on the same page here. So someone saying something like that to a hiring manager or recruiter is going to go pretty far. And in terms of like landing opportunities, that might not get you the offer, but it could get you the interview, which is like really what you're trying to do here. Like you're trying to get to someone to explain your background. You're trying to get out of this big general applicant pool. And so that's really why I'm encouraging you to do this extra work in terms of trying to reach out, because it really will pay off here. Before I move on though, does anyone have any questions so far just about like the strategy or, concerns that they have with like the changing work environment?
I do have a question just kind of regarding what you said about reaching out to companies that you're kind of interested in using, the directory or something like that, and just how you kind of go about doing that in a way that's not like how you kind of start that conversation, whether it be, a phone number or an email for a recruiter or something like that, to where the person doesn't feel like, oh, it's just another person, begging for a job.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question because, like, I'm sure once you're out working, you're not necessarily maybe paying attention to LinkedIn as much, or like you're kind of invested in your career, so it changes a little bit. However, at the end of the day, people do tend to want to help others, and especially if there's some familiarity or a common relationship already. So that's why I encourage you to reach out to Pitt alums first, or anyone that's in your direct network where there's some sort of familiarity. I mean, and it could be like an aunt, an uncle, like, they don't have to necessarily like be Pitt affiliated, but what that does is it gives you an opener already. So for instance, like on LinkedIn, if you were to connect with someone, they need to know why you're connecting. So that's the first thing you can do is with that connection request, do that little personal note. Just say like, hey, came across you on Pitt's campus page. I'll be sending a follow-up message. And so that way they kind of know like this isn't just some random person, And so then whenever you connect and you send them this message, very briefly, because you want to make it easy for them to respond to you. And the more that you type out, the more they're going to procrastinate responding because they have to think about it longer. And so you keep it very brief. So same thing, hey, I came across you on Pitt's, Pitt's alumni page. I see that you're working for IBM. I didn't know if you had some time to talk. I'm going to be graduating soon, or I just graduated. I'd love to know what people, in this industry are doing, or I'd love to learn more about your role. So keep it like so brief that it's either like a yes or a no, if that makes sense. And then let them dictate the format, so let them say, hey, yeah, I mean, I'm available for like a 15-minute phone call, or sure, talk with my assistant. We'll set something up for Zoom. So you really want them to take the lead and not make it seem like you're not necessarily rushing them or asking too much of their time. And be prepared, if you meet with them, be prepared with some good questions, things you truly do want to know that you can't find out on a website, challenges they're facing or attributes they're looking for on a team. Like those aren't usually broadcast, in a public way. And then, people do this for two reasons. They do it to get more information, but they also do get it to try to get some sort of referral. And these conversations don't always end in a referral, or they don't always end in a referral right away. Sometimes it's a very delayed reaction. It might be like 6 months down the road and they're emailing you and say, hey, are you still looking? Or are you thinking about, this other opportunity? So it's something that can continue on much longer, like a relationship. So I don't know if that answered the question or not. Yeah. Okay. So actually let me stop sharing my slides here because we only have 4 minutes here. So let me ask, in terms of like what people are concerned about looking, or like things that are not working or are working, is there anything that I could directly address now? And I will send out the slides with the rest of the information because I just want to make sure we're getting to the heart of this here. Yes. Okay. So someone asked, how many interviews do people go on when they don't get the job? How much rejection should I anticipate? Fantastic question. And I wish, I wish I could say that rejection is few and far between, but it's actually the norm. So, so don't beat yourselves up too badly on this. There are a lot of factors that go into play that might have nothing to do with you. Referrals definitely help bump someone up higher on the list, but at the end of the day, if they're just not a good fit for what that team needs, they're going to pass on that person. And I don't want you to think that you should pass on that company, because that's what happens. People get like they get attached to a company that's like maybe their dream job or something. They get told, no, we're going to move on to other candidates. And then they like never want to go near that company again. Try not to do that, because if you got an interview, it means they were already interested. It just wasn't a good fit for that particular role or that particular time. So reach out to that recruiter after and thank them for their time and say, hey, please keep me in mind, or let me know if there's something that would be a better fit. Touch base with that person down the road, if you're looking into things. So easier said than done not to feel emotionally attached to this, but there really are so many factors that go into play with timing. And anytime you follow up on an application, you get a little bit more peace of mind. Like they might just say, hey, we're not really going to be making phone calls for second round, or we might not be even interviewing until June. Like this is all good stuff for you to know. So you're just not like waiting. And in terms of like how many interviews, so I'm gonna throw out like a crazy stat here. I don't mean to scare you guys, but so if you didn't do any sort of like additional stuff, like no follow-up, no targeted company list, no informational interviews, if you only just applied to jobs on job boards, it takes about 125 applications to result in 3 interviews and 1 offer. So you can see the statistics are not on your side. You're going to experience all those rejections that maybe you didn't need to do. So that's why I encourage you to use these other strategies in order to make the most of your time. And like do a spreadsheet or something, have tabs of different cities and keep track of your progress. It gets really complicated when people call you out of nowhere and you're thinking like, I don't even remember what role this was. So do yourself a favor, like anything you can do to stay organized. So really good question. And then someone else asked, does PIT offer career services after graduation? Yes. So don't feel like you have to do this all by the end of the month. Our services are good for a whole year after graduation, no cost. I mentioned though, scheduling, you just have to go through the front desk or the career consultant. So it's a little bit different. But you still have access to all our resources, career fairs, events, and all of that. So definitely, like if you're focusing on your classes and things right now, like don't feel like you have to, overwhelm yourself. We are available after. So, okay, one other question here. So, student with lots of work experience doesn't really relate to the graduate degree and feel like I'm falling between the cracks. What do you suggest that I do? Yeah, so this happens a lot, especially with students that might be drifting away from their majors, even just a little bit. They're kind of like unsure of how an employer views them. This is why it's so important to do company research. Talk to recruiters about sort of where you land, because if you're already coming in with work experience, you might accidentally be applying to jobs that are too entry level, so you're going to get passed over. And so that's something that you really want to try to dig into if you can, and then think about what transferable skills do you have that you can use for other types of settings. And I'm happy to talk with students more about that as well. That's probably a good reason to have an appointment or do a drop-in. We can kind of sit down and see where you're at. All right. And then one last question here, since I already won. Should we write a cover letter for every application? Is there a time to only send a resume? So some companies bypass the cover letters. They ask supplemental questions like, why do you want to work here? Is there anything on your resume like that's not on there we should know about? But if they give you the option to write a cover letter, it is suggested, especially if you've talked with someone from that company, that is like the main reason to write that cover letter, is to breed that familiarity that you've already talked with someone. This is what you want. This is why you're qualified. You're doing the hiring manager a favor by telling them the things they need to know and the insight that you glean from meeting with someone. So you do want to like specifically name the name, or you can say like a representative of, X company I spoke with at a fair, whatever you want to do, that's the part you tailor. And then the rest of it backs up your qualifications. And if you're applying to very similar types of roles, you probably only just have to edit certain sections. But if you're applying for very different types of roles, like maybe software development and data analytics, then yeah, you're probably going to want to have a different set of qualifications that you're showcasing. Very good questions here. Okay, so as promised, we took attendance here. I'm going to stop the recording, and I'm going to make sure I send out the slides to talk about the things that we didn't get to.